Well, welcome to the last session of day one, our broadband and 5G panel discussion. With us today, we have Tom Ferree, who is providing vision and leadership, guiding Connected Nations conversations around broadband at the national level. And then we also have with us today Phillip Brown, who is with Crown Castle, and he also spent a part of his career at Connected Nation. So both gentlemen have extreme experience in what's happening in our broadband and 5G areas across the United States as well as in the state of Kentucky. I'm Dawn Yankeelov, Executive Director of TALK, the Technology Association of Louisville, Kentucky, as well as President of Aspects, a PR and marketing firm. And I work at the national level in public policy as well regarding broadband and other tech subjects like cybersecurity. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take a quick look to get you oriented to some of the basics of what's happening in broadband. And I'm going to have Phillip do some introductory slides, and then we'll come back and circle through some of those slides and go a little more in depth as we want to dive in. So I'm going to let you take it over, Phillip.
Great. And I think the first couple of slides are Tom's, so I'm going to turn it right over to him and let him sort of start out with Connected Nation and sort of what they are and what they do, and then he's going to, I think, kick off with a high-level look at federal activity.
Yeah, thank you, Phillip. Thank you, Dawn. It's a pleasure to be here, and congratulations on what looks to be a strong start to Techfest 2021. So I guess before we talk about kind of what the current state of broadband is nationally, I'd like to tell you about our little role in it so that you gain some context about my comments. So Connected Nation is a national nonprofit. We were actually initially launched in Bowling Green, but we now, I think, proudly boast impact against the digital divide in 42 states and 1 U.S. territory. Also proud to celebrate this year our 20th year, our anniversary of service. So we've seen a lot of different expressions of the digital divide and the various iterations of broadband and what constitutes broadband over the number of years that we've been at this work. I would think that the best way to describe our mission is to really improve lives and strengthen communities through better access, adoption, and use of broadband. And so that puts us at in those communities, from digital literacy training to device deployment programming to facilitating low-cost programs and access to that. We also start most of our work by getting and brokering in good data. So how we really got our start was in broadband availability mapping. And I know that seems commonplace now, but if you go back to our origins in 2001, we were generating some of the first maps that the industry had aggregated different and diverse providers onto a single page so that people would understand where are those gaps and where do we need to begin to implement policies and programs aimed at tackling that and empowering everyone from a state of connectedness. So again, if I try to bring it home regionally, a lot of our work, of course, launched in Kentucky, and then it quickly emanated from Kentucky down south into Tennessee and then into Ohio. So we had this little 3-state nucleus going for quite a while. And in the course of the first years of our existence, we impacted about 80,000 lives from a digital literacy perspective. That's where we really engage at the local community. And you think of 3 states, 80,000 population, but that's some of the most disenfranchised, hardest hit people. A lot of times these were refugees, these were severely low income or severely rural and remote areas that we were making these very targeted interventions to get these folks online. And it's really amazing. I was laughing with Phillip about what used to constitute broadband. I mean, when we were looking at sub 3 meg as a definition and really just working like hell to get over that barrier.
200 something kilobytes per second at one point, or kilobits per second was broadband
so,
at one day.
You even go lower. So we've come a long way, as the ad used to say. And so what I'd like to go to now is just and not go all the way back 20 years, but where we stand right now is on the precipice of something that it's hard to say that it's a generational. I mean, what we're literally on the edge of is something that is the 100-year storm of potentially eradicating at least the biggest impact against the digital divide that we've known as a country, but certainly in existence as an organization. But I will go back to 10 years ago, or a little over 10 years ago, the last time that we stood on something that was this huge from a potential investment in broadband as a national infrastructure priority. Many of you all will know that is the American Reinvestment Recovery Act. Phillip, you'll go to our next slide. I'll show you. And again, this is not intended to be a scientific comparison. This is a context slide, so let me emphasize that. But I want to give you an order of magnitude of where we were when we last heralded this great age of broadband priority from a national infrastructure perspective, and then where we are today. So if you go back to 2009, and this followed on behind a bill that was signed into law under the Bush administration named the Broadband Data Improvement Act. And really what that did, if I'm be so bold to say, it really kind of codified and held up as an exemplar the work that we had been doing for a number of years in Kentucky, Tennessee, and Ohio, and said, if it's good for these states and it can be driving this degree of economic development and personal and community empowerment, then it should be good for everyone. And that was also tied loosely to the fact that they wanted to say, how can we begin to really bring a cohesive look from a national perspective? At the time, the FCC did not require or even compel providers to report broadband availability data. That's really the reason we started where we were in Kentucky and Tennessee and Ohio. So it said, well, listen, we can do it in 3 states. And we weren't the only ones. There were other handful of states that were undertaking programs that sought to really map out the access dilemma, the adoption dilemma, right? So those are supply and demand measures, and really so that you get a total look at the challenges and therefore begin to fashion the right interventions. So the BDIA came and said, hey, listen, there are a couple of things that we want to make sure that every state could do and bring some degree of uniformity to it, but allow the nuance of each state's personality to do it the way they need to do it best. But it was like all good laws, Phillip, an unfunded mandate. So it said you should do this. This is a good idea, but get to your own measures to do it. Then, of course, 2008 financial downturn comes along, the American Reinvestment and Recovery Reinvestment Act, and it sought to pick up that piece of legislation and fund it. And that's where we saw a $350 million. You'll see that in the notes there, a $350 million effort to do what we were doing in those 3 states across the country. It was part of a larger $7 billion package. And so I'll bring it back up to the top to say $7 billion was the bogey in 2009. Compare that now, and listen, these numbers are ever changing. $350 billion. And of course, it's the infrastructure bill that's, I guess, working its way through the House this week, perhaps? Could add it.
Maybe, soon.
It's doing something over there. Working maybe a stretch. That's going to add another $65 billion to that number. And so, again, by order of magnitude, it's huge. It's huge. And so, now, what will all that money go toward? Obviously, a lot of it is to the provider community, to the service providers to help build out the infrastructure and across. And again, I don't want to fixate just on what we in the industry would call last mile. That's the ones that are actually turning up service for a customer or a business, but it can also underwrite key infrastructure pieces a little bit lower in the network stacks. There's some of those physical layer networks, network components across the middle mile and what some people refer to as first mile. So it's a comprehensive top to bottom investment eligibility effort that we're looking at. Now, what I would direct you to as far as orientation, again, selfishly from a nonprofit perspective, some of the change agents that are looking to meet that investment and with the communities and with those more vulnerable populations to really make it drive its point home to at least some of the more vulnerable areas of the digital divide. Some of the things that are a little bit different from when we undertook this in 2009 to where we stand today. One of the things I tell you is, again, so the opportunity, so group, and again, so this gray orientation is going to be very fixated on groups like mine that are out here from a nonprofit perspective, looking to energize this investment, make it work for providers, make it work for communities, make it work for lawmakers and policy stakeholders. From an opportunity perspective, I think we're going to be focused in some of these areas that are capital projects funds, because those appear right now to be the things that will allow programs like mine to be a part of this. So it's kind of a liberal definition of where some of this spend can be directed and kind of the activities that it can do. If you look at 2009, we were aiming these implements and this ammunition at a, again, and this we'll get into this a little bit later in the conversation. Pinning down the size of the problem, Don, has always been a challenge. Because depending on what your unit of measure is or how you're defining certain things, there's a lot of variables that leave a lot of room for interpretation. But for simplicity's sake, let's say, rather than argue about it, we had about 120 million people that defined the digital divide in 2009. And I want to make the differentiation. That can be a geography issue where there literally is no access to a network, or it can be a more socioeconomic barrier, an adoption barrier, or it could be a relevancy barrier. In 2009, we were dealing with, believe it or not, relevancy. I don't need the internet. Well, I think COVID, if there was ever a chance to not waste a good crisis, that the relevancy issue is no longer on the table. Everyone understands now. Lawmakers, and especially those that are crushed by the digital divide, understand the relevancy and the need for it. That's a marked difference from where we were when we embarked on this effort a little over 10 years ago. Now we're looking at about a $90 million person definition of digital divide. And again, I will tell you, where I would say in 2009, especially in the rural areas, you were dealing with an access issue to the network. I think that's by and large, except in those really, really remote areas, you still have an access challenge. But you're seeing now the emergence of a bigger divide by the lack of adoption. And most times that's tied to an affordability issue. And so you'll hear a lot in policy discussions right now, the affordability gap. So there's a lot of programming being aimed at this 350 billion plus, aimed at how do you make it not only accessible, but affordable too. So you'll see a lot of things, the Digital Equity Act, some of the Emergency Connectivity Fund, the Emergency Broadband Fund. There's a lot of awareness about that being a formidable opponent in the fight against the digital divide. I won't read all these to you. I'll tell you a few things, though, that really kind of define my space as a nonprofit working to get broadband adopted and out there. When we started in 2009, there was a high passion. Everyone, at least those that were in the know, were very, very energized, highly mobilized, and wanting to get out there. We had a lot of gusto, but we had light experience. And so contrast that to today, relevancy. Again, we're seeing the convergence now of high degree relevancy, extremely high priority from a national perspective, and of course the funding to boot. So again, it's an incredible coming together that can really make a dent in this problem. The other thing is we've got experience, and not just Connected Nation, a number of states and other nonprofits that are in the space. They've got a lot of seasoned years and experience. They know what worked, they know what didn't work. I think we're, as a nation, a whole lot more attuned to, what are some of those longitudinal outcomes or, personal uses of the internet and what it can do in ways that make our dollars go a little bit further because we're using them more wisely. And believe it or not, data fitness. All of this starts with having good data. We've got a ways to go. I'm very optimistic about how we can even tool that data and discipline it even more to start pointing to exactly where we need to go and what we need to do when we get there. And that is going to be something that I think will be a game changer as well. And again, so it makes that dollar go a lot further, and then we've got a whole lot of dollars. So we're really excited. So if you're in this game that we're in and you're seeing the digital divide, you know the value. And by the way, there's not a CEO in America that doesn't understand the value in getting every home, school, hospital, clinic, business online. Everyone understands that. And my goodness, we're just really, if you can't get excited about what lies ahead in the fight on the digital divide, then I'm not sure. Phillip, I don't know how I could tee it up any better than that, but I'll let you, we're excited. And we're excited to be here, Dawn. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so
Yes.
Tom and I have known each other for a really long time. We've been working in the same space, in the same office for a while. I left Connected Nation back in 2015, but he and I have been talking broadband together for many, many years. So Phillip Brown, I'm a government affairs manager for Crown Castle. And Crown Castle is the country's largest owner and operator of shared communications infrastructure. We've got over 40,000 cell phone towers across the United States. 70,000 small, actually it's 80,000 small cells at this point, either constructed or under contract. And then over 80,000 route miles of fiber that connects those small cells, which are small cell wireless facilities and large towers, and lights them up and makes them operate. In Kentucky, that's about 690 towers, 225 fiber miles. Here in Louisville, it's over 115 towers and 160 small cells. We're covering about 97% of Louisville's population. And then in Indiana, just across the river, our infrastructure covers about 80% of that state's population as well. And shared infrastructure simply means that we provide services to any entity that might need space on a tower. So we will place more than one wireless carrier on the same tower, and it means that instead of having three towers dotting the landscape, you might just have one. Same with small cells. When we put a small cell on a street corner or in the right-of-way, we're going to make sure that we have space inside that one pole for multiple providers of wireless service. And that serves our needs because we're paying for construction once. And then it also serves the interest of the public because it means there's less things dotting the landscape, less things out there on the streetscape. One of the remarks that Tom gave, it made me think about, what is government's role in broadband? And that's a topic of some debate out there nationally at the federal, state, or local level. A lot of different opinions on that. They range from the far left to the far right in terms of the political spectrum. But what I come back to is a meeting I had back in 2018 when I was with the state of Kentucky, and I was leading the agency that is running Kentucky Wired. And I was with some Northern Kentucky elected officials, government employees, who were all concerned about one thing. This is Boone, Kenton, and Campbell County. And so that's an urban area for Kentucky. But they said, we have 26,000 households that don't have access to broadband today. And I was like, how is that possible? Well, as people move further and further into the exurbs, to the southern halves of those counties, they're moving into places and houses that have just been built. And the infrastructure hasn't caught up yet. Today, broadband is considered critical infrastructure. Wireless communications considered critical infrastructure. Water, sewer, electricity, other things that have to be present at a household in our country today. And I think what we see is when something is considered critical infrastructure, when it's a have-to-have service, citizens tend to look towards the government as needing to play a role in ensuring that they have it. And the amount of money, the amount of attention that's being paid at a federal level, at a state level, at a local level here in Louisville, I think you're seeing that government officials agree and recognize that demand. Broadband speed has changed. The definition of broadband has changed. I usually will say that, broadband is really just shorthand for high-speed internet. And the problem is that high speed, that part of that definition, high speed is subjective. So high speed for someone may be really slow for someone else. And the definition of broadband has consistently changed over the last decade. At one point, it was slower than a 1 megabit per second download. Today, the FCC's definition is still 25 megabits per second down, 3 megabits per second up. But there's been a lot of pressure, a lot of advocacy in recent years to ratchet that up. So I think that with high-speed communications networks, what you'll see is a continued, I call it, we'll always be chasing speed. At some point, you're always going to need faster speeds or more capacity. One of the things that Crown Castle consistently deals with, one of the things that we help with, is that you can have a network that is providing coverage over a geographic area. A geographic area might have 100% coverage, but what is that network's capacity? Capacity is a different issue. Capacity is you're at the Yum Center at a concert, you take a picture of yourself and you want to upload it to Instagram or to Twitter, and it just won't work. Why? It's because everybody else at the Yum Center is trying to do the exact same thing with the video they just took or the 10 pictures they just took. And so that network's capacity is overloaded. Capacity is a growing issue. Today we have more smartphones in the United States than we have citizens. And we also have another 200 million devices that are connected to the network. Some of those devices are connected to the network all the time. Your Ring doorbell, it's connected all the time. Maybe your teenage daughter, got one of those, has left Spotify on all day long, in her room, on Alexa, even though she's at school. That is drawing data 24 hours a day. We use, in America, 40% more data every single year, year over year. So let's pick a speed. I could pick a megabit, I could pick a gigabit, which is 1,000 megabits. I could pick a terabit. I'm going to use a petabit. A petabit is 1 million gigabits. And at the height of the lockdown last year, just one of our wireless network carriers, national wireless companies, said that their network traffic was 426 petabytes per day. That's an enormous amount of data. They saw a 71 petabyte per day increase after the lockdowns began. So let's say it's a petabyte. I said 40% year over year, more data consumed by America as a whole. So if it's 40% year over year, that's kind of like compound interest. Let's say it's 100 petabytes a day. So by year 20, that's become 83,000 petabytes per day. It gets really steep really fast once you get past the sixth or seventh year. And so it's just this exponentially growing demand for data as we do everything online, and everything in our house, like our TVs, are connecting to our routers and pulling content straight to your TV from your router. That's network demand. By the way, I'm way off script. I've got like 8 or 9 slides. I'm probably just going to skip a bunch of them.
Let's talk briefly about
Great.
this federal infrastructure package. Do we need $1 trillion infrastructure package, and then the states will receive some of this money? Is that something that you believe we really need to have at this point, or are there certain areas like the digital divide and digital inclusion where that's really where the money will end up?
You want to take the first one?
That was the question was, do we need it?
Or how much of it do we need?
Yeah.
Well, I think that clearly we're at a point that the public will and the will of our elected officials is to eliminate the digital divide, to make broadband, high-speed communications ubiquitous. Finally, it's certainly an unprecedented commitment of resources. This is a lot of money. I'm actually getting to a slide here that kind of, there we go. For comparison, the Universal Service Fund, which was created, 100 years ago?
Yeah.
That was to ensure that everybody's house had telephone service. Yeah. And then a little more than a decade ago, the FCC said, job well done on connecting every house to phone service. Let's now pivot to broadband. USF is $9 billion a year. That's a lot of money too. We sometimes forget that the federal government is funding school connectivity and last mile connectivity and healthcare connectivity with $9 billion every single year. But this money is targeted to places where you can say the households do not have broadband or that area is underserved. So, hopefully it's going to go to the places that it is needed to solve a connectivity problem. I think that there would be a lot of questions if 10 years from now we still got a significant number of households that don't have any access to the internet other than non-terrestrial providers like satellite. And that's not to say that there won't continue to be development and growth in places where networks still have to catch up. But as we heard a few years ago from the Commonwealth of Kentucky, there are places in Kentucky and eastern Kentucky where the hollers are so steep that even satellite has trouble penetrating down to the houses at the bottom of those valleys. And so there's certainly huge geographical challenges that I think probably require an all-of-the-above approach to platforms. It's one of the reasons Crown Castle's happy that the current draft of the Senate bill, which is now pending to the House, leaves open the door for fixed wireless to play a role with 100 megabits per second download, 20 megabits per second upload as a speed threshold. That's going to allow fixed wireless providers, which are probably dollar for dollar a good way to provide those houses with some broadband. It's good that we're not closing off entire platforms of service to the subsidies that might, ensure that service makes it as far as it can. I don't know if that answered that question. Maybe I ducked and dived around the whole question.
Pretty good. Phillip used to do government affairs for us, so
yes,
he's been trained well.
It's good to get some perspective, right? Yeah. And then we have the 5G piece, and where's that going to take us? So where is 5G going to take America, and what are some of the top uses and places that you think in the next 5 years we're going to start seeing real use of 5G?
Well, that's going to play right into Philip's wheelhouse. So if I could, I'm going to, because I like to talk to you, I'm going to come back to your question.
Oh, yes, please.
I didn't get to go on record for that, but absolutely, I think we need that investment. I think that irrespective of your political stripe, I think everyone can understand the value and the payoff and the return on sound investments in infrastructure. I think when we think about, and this will be your segue into your 5G, when we think about the world race to 5G right now, I think America has a huge opportunity and obligation to lead. And I think that, if we want to win that, then I'm not sure there's an investment that's too big. But I want to come back from a social benefit to tell you this. Yes, we can look at the digital divide getting smaller and smaller, but I will tell you, and Phillip, I know that you will violently agree with me when I tell you this, the smaller number is the most expensive.
Yeah.
And shy something tremendous like this, it won't happen. And not only to get them to what maybe constitutes broadband today at 25.3, we need to be future-proofing these communities. We're looking at a real existential threat to rural communities if we do not get them on par with their urban counterparts. All the values that make up the things that we like about America are on display every day in rural America, and they're a national gem. And if we don't get those people to be able to be gainfully employed, access to health care, education, that they can choose to live versus have to leave, I think we're going to lose a real national gem. So yes, I'm passionate about it. And Dawn, I would tell you, there's absolutely a call for that level of investment.
Okay, great. All right.
All right, so
race to 5G.
So 5G. First, I think let's start with just the quality of life. 5G is of course the 5th generation of wireless service. It's going to enable the things that high-speed internet enable. It's better access to healthcare, jobs, education, public safety, and that's the easy part of the answer. But let's talk about the economic impact. We're looking at 1.4 to 1.7 trillion in national GDP over the next 10 years, and I'm reading these stats because I don't have them memorized. 3.8 to 4.6 million jobs across the country. It's 11% growth in healthcare, 20% job growth in education, 489,000 jobs in manufacturing. Research by Connected Nation a few years ago, businesses, 70% of businesses said that they use broadband every single day to grow their business, create more jobs. 32% of those 70% said that they needed faster speeds and couldn't get it. So that's businesses that say, I need it right now in order to expand my customer base, stay relevant, stay in business. The pandemic has seen more people leaving city centers and deciding to relocate to more rural areas. That's good for rural America.
The original social distance.
That's exactly right. But they need connectivity to do that. You can't maintain your IT sector job in a place that doesn't have access to IT sector speeds. Years ago, there's a foundation or an institution dedicated towards funding rural foundations. It's raised the alarm about the flight of wealth out of our rural communities. Grandparents, parents die, the kids have moved away, they've gone to the coast, maybe they've moved out of Eastern Kentucky to Lexington or Louisville. And when their parents and the previous generation passes away and those estates move down a generation, that money never comes back to that community. And it represents a hollowing out of that community's potential. That's a real concern for for some of our rural communities here in Kentucky, the other states that I represent or work for as far as government affairs, and the ability to move back home or move to a more rural part of America if that's what someone wants to do and maintain their job and their employment. If that's where someone wants their life to go, we shouldn't let something like lack of access impede or prevent that from happening. Absolutely not. So, in addition, I think, we've got here agribusiness represented on my slide. Agriculture years ago recognized the value of connectivity. You've got tons of smart tractors out there from John Deere and other farm implements. They are doing precision agriculture. It's amazing to watch, but that is a wireless connection. And so that smart tractor or combine or harvester has to have connectivity, and that's in places where there are not a lot of people. One of the challenges to ubiquitous broadband is that it's in places where not a lot of people live, so it's harder to achieve return on investment. Population density is where we don't necessarily see an access problem. In addition, we've got, actually, some of these things I can't talk about in detail. We're doing some really cool things with drones right now, in addition to some other companies. Some exciting things that are going to make it easier for my company to directly do our jobs, but also facilitate the needs of our customers. Autonomous drones are an exciting area that 5G is going to help develop. 5G is going to help public safety. I know the city of Louisville is really looking at its investment in a fiber network that overbuilt Kentucky Wired with this. One of the lenses they're looking at that through is public safety. 4 out of every 5 cell phone or 911 calls is made from a wireless device. Not known to many people, but it's definitely something that we should remember when we think about public safety and wireless connectivity. And then I would say too, just anecdotally, we know that when 4G was introduced, Uber was not yet a thing. DoorDash was not yet a thing. The gig economy applications that our phones enable were not invented when 4G was deployed. And so we don't yet know what 5G is going to enable in the minds of innovators. So once the speed and the capacity are there, that's when we're going to start to see, new things, new inventions that are really, really neat, and that we just don't know what they are yet. I would say autonomous driving. Certainly the autonomous vehicles. We're making strides in that as a country. Clearly, people want to make sure that works 100% before everyone's car is driving itself.
If you're navigating a turn at high speed, you don't want to. There's no time to buffer on your network. That's for sure.
Well, and that's where 5G helps, because one of the things that in addition to faster speeds, huge improvements in latency. And latency is really one of those things that's going to stand in the way of an autonomous vehicle is what happens in terms of the length of time that signal takes to move back and forth.
So I guess I want to ask one more question, then we'll turn it over to the audience, which is on Kentucky Wired and some of the initiatives in the state. What kind of progress have you seen in the last 5 years in what we have done in our state specifically?
Okay.
This is probably an area where you're a little bit deeper, but I'll start by saying, by our research, if we had to define the digital divide here in Kentucky, and we've got a wonderful asset in Kentucky Wired, if it can get leveraged in ways to help where traditional models have kind of fallen flat. I think last number I saw was about 92% is what they would say access is in Kentucky, which sounds good, except you see that puts Kentucky, I think, 40th in the nation as far as current standing on connectedness. When you look at some counties like Ohio County, I think Hancock, broadband access is less than 50%. And so, but again, those are going to be those rural, remote areas. And so it sounds like we've come a long way, and we have, but again, we have these pockets and these segments right now that are woefully underserved, and we've got to start throwing our resources and attention at it so that we can lift all our Kentuckians up to that level. As far as progress goes, especially if you take the time span and you go back to where we really got active in 2004, Phillip, it's night and day.
Absolutely.
From where we are. And so I commend the state on that. I think to take full advantage of this investment that looms right now, and I'm encouraged by the things I'm hearing. I haven't necessarily seen it just yet, but the state is starting to organize, to get very intentional about this in ways that, only, billions of dollars will do for you. And so if we can continue on that trajectory to build and increase our attention and deliberateness in creating a strategic plan and a vision and holding accountable those investments, and then having a strategy to meet that investment in those communities so that those communities and those citizens aren't just passive recipients of this investment, but they're actively engaged in making it work for everybody. That's what I'm encouraged about. So I think Kentucky's got a little bit of ways to go. Being down there at 40, we can improve that. We've got the means now. We need the vision, and we need the strategic plan to do it.
Yeah, I think I would just tag on. The slide here is that, we deal a lot when we're talking about, fiber in the right of way or small cells. That's generally involves tearing up the street some way. There is a race to 5G. China is going to install small cells wherever they please as fast as they need to. And we have to work with cities collaboratively. Louisville's great to work with. Lexington is too. They're two cities that really have figured out a way to ensure that companies like mine that are installing poles in the right of way as a utility are regulated to ensure that we're doing things the right way, but in a way that's predictable. So if we have a need to install a small cell for a customer, one of the important things is that we are predictable, that when we tell them it's going to take 18 months, it takes 18 months. It should not take 18 months anywhere in America to install a small cell, which is just a pole in the right of way, but that's about the average. It's too long, but being predictable is better than it being 24 months. If we say 18, it needs to be 18. Cycle time faster is always better. When we get a request to install some sort of infrastructure for a customer, it's because they are seeing the need in their network right now. Yesterday's too late. So faster is always better. Cheaper is great too. It's lowering the cost of deployment allows our customers to deploy more, and that's a good thing when we're trying to see networks expand. But so look at what's happening in Kentucky, and I'll zoom in on this as well, like I did with that last one. You've got a huge investment in the last legislative session, $300 million total to improve broadband in Kentucky. A few years ago when I was with the state, I was asked to travel down to Western Kentucky by our state representative. She wanted me to talk to some local realtors who were upset because they couldn't sell houses in that county. They would be doing that walkthrough with the potential buyer, and the buyer would say, "What is my broadband connection?" And they would say, "It's dial-up." And then that contract wouldn't get signed. So this is a real impact on local small businesses, like a realtor. So it should be $250 million in grants, and then $50 million for economic development projects associated. The state had a recent request for information, and they basically were saying, "Give us your ideas about what we need to do to close the digital divide in Kentucky." I added in their local community actions. You had Scott County, Kentucky, just awarded an RFP or announced a project with Charter to do a fiber to the home network to bring service to houses in Scott County that don't have broadband. And then if you can leverage, marry, and sort of have in concert the federal government funding that's coming down still today, and then the more to come, you might be able to do something really special. And then Kentucky Wired, it's a middle mile network, 288 fiber strands, 3,400 miles. Construction's like 99% complete at this point. So half that network is open access. It's intended to be used by internet service providers to expand their network. The other half, the state's reserving for itself because the state is providing broadband to its state agencies itself. Rather than buying that service in the marketplace, the state's decided to self-provide broadband. So it's like a statewide wide area network, for lack of a better term. But there's a lot of potential there. It's a huge investment in every community in Kentucky. It's not without its controversy. It's horribly late, and it costs more money than the state thought it would back in 2015. It is a construction project. Construction projects are prone to encounter delays. I think I stepped into that project about 18 months after it was launched, so I was sort of trying to fix some problems, and I think what I observed is just that some of the assumptions about schedule in particular assumed that nothing was going to go wrong. And construction projects normally don't have that sort of thing happen. Then what's needed, I want to put in a plug for some things that we think could happen as far as policy. Some tax incentives, pole attachment reform. The FCC a few years ago reformed pole attachment rules. It's basically a one-touch make-ready rule for the country. However, Kentucky self-regulates poles, and so Kentucky is going to have to do the same thing at a state level in order to make attaching to poles go faster. And that is a very common, very widespread challenge and delayer of deployment that impacts anyone that doesn't actually own those poles. So it's something that, the FCC recognized under Chairman Pai a few years ago, and the Kentucky Public Service Commission is looking at rules right now. Small cell uniformity, and then microtrenching, which Google tried famously here in Louisville. We call that nano trenching. The depth that they were at, which is about 4 inches below the roadway, is not deep enough. But when you get to 12 inches below the roadway, it's a way to cut a 2-inch wide trench in the street instead of a 2-foot wide, 4-foot deep trench. And it means that if we need to run fiber to a small cell, which we typically always do, sometimes underground is better. And it takes about a quarter of the time. It kicks up a lot less debris and dust. It means there's a lot smaller impact on traffic. So there's a benefit to the public, and we just think it's a construction method that we encourage localities to consider. You're allowed to do it here in Louisville by regulation, and there's a nice 15-page set of guidance on how exactly the city, what they expect you to do. As far as taxes, one of the things that Crown Castle and some other broadband providers were advocating in prior sessions of our General Assembly is a sales tax holiday for broadband deployment. It's about a $38 million sales tax deferment in year one, $60 million in year two, but over 197% of that in year one and 307% of that in year two would be invested back into networks. Kentucky is the only one of the states in our region that doesn't have some sort of tax incentive for broadband deployment. Whether it's property taxes, sales taxes, we're doing the grants. We're not tackling the tax side of it. And what we hear out of the General Assembly with every other tax idea in Kentucky is we're going to wait until we do comprehensive tax reform. And that's something that if you've been paying attention to politics in Kentucky for very long, or public policy, sales tax reform, overall comprehensive tax reform is one of those things that it's been on the docket for the next session for many, many, many sessions. And then small cell bill. Small cell uniformity just means it's the same rules. The FCC's passed national standards on how long a locality can take to review a small cell application, a uniformity as far as fees that can be charged. And then all these states in blue have small cell legislation that sort of governs that at a state level. It just, again, gets back to that predictability and deployment cost side of things. Kentucky, I think there's a constitutional issue with regards to a state law, but we're just trying to work with communities to say, if we have to think about how many communities there are in Kentucky, and so if there's a different standard on how long they're going to take and what they're going to charge, it makes it harder to do business here, and it means that a lot of the large carriers that are going to be deploying 5G networks are going to think, well, it's easier in Tennessee, or it's easier in Ohio or Indiana. And so we're going to do that. We're not going to never get to Kentucky, but we might get to Kentucky last. As Mark Twain once said, everything in Kentucky happens 20 years later. We don't want that with 5G. And we do have 5G deployment happening here in Kentucky. Crown Castle's been a part of that, as well as some other companies. And so I would expect to see all of the carriers moving to 5G and improving their networks in the next 18 months, 2 years. Some of it's happening right now. And I can't get specific about carriers. We generally like to let our customers talk about their own networks because really we just own this deal that puts their equipment in the air.
Okay, I think we're going to get some closing remarks from Tom on kind of wrapping us up here, and then we can take one question and then we'll wrap up for our cocktail hour, which will be at the Panelists Club down the street. Just go down 2nd, and it'll be at the corner of Muhammad Ali and 2nd. So let's hear some final thoughts about what's ahead of us. Where do you think you might be wanting to take us under Connected Nation?
Good data. Good data begets good decisions. And when you have that much money, you have a moral obligation to spend it wisely. Because gosh, what a shame it would be to have that much capital infusion and still have, chronic problems 5 years from now. We've got a real opportunity as a nation to do that. So good data, focus on that, prioritize that. If you're a state, take the action by making it a priority, establishing a broadband office, collect the data so that you can coordinate all these different providers that are going to be implementing their solutions with this money. You've got to have an accounting for it. That's good government. That's accountability. You got to have a read on it. Be a partner with industry. It's certainly not a way to be punitive or restrictive. It's to be a coordinating facilitation responsibility for government. So do that. Kentucky needs to step up there. They need to get a broadband map, a real good broadband map. The feds are going to help with that. There's going to be a lot of federal data to access. You got to have somebody locally working that data and making it to inform good decisions. And then focus on affordability. Louisville is, I know that Mayor Fisher has prioritized that with some of the monies they're going to be getting, is making sure that where there's a need to access the internet, that it's not going to be a barrier if someone can't afford it.
All right. Do we have any questions from the audience? Yes, Dan?
So a lot of the stuff you were talking about on the state level seems to be kind of sitting up in the state right now. What can be done kind of on a county by county, city by city kind of basis? Because I know, like Floyd County, when I was there recently talking to them, they said that the 2020 census is probably going to show that that county's gone from 6,000 people to 4,000. So how does it need to be regionalized? I mean, how can you start prioritizing and making good decisions about where to put the broadband and where the biggest need is? You've got some places that have absolutely no rules whatsoever, and then it's a hard to account.
Well, here will be a shameless plug. If you'll go to our website, I would tell you, anybody that's watching and you here in the audience, there's almost not an area too small to begin to organize. But you've got to get your hands on what the problem is, because the better that you can communicate with specificity where the challenge is, as I will come back to my data plug, the more powerful and impactful you will be in the decisions and the discussions that you're going to have with the people that are ultimately going to be making those investments. So there are toolkits, and it's not just our company. There are a number of areas for citizenry to get involved, but the county government, city governments, region. A lot of times where we see a state not act, you're going to see a very vibrant community scene that starts to take the bull by the horns. And so there's a number of resources from my organization and a number of others that really help a community get their act together. And it starts by getting a universal view of what the challenges that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, I would add just a place like Floyd County, a regional approach, working with some other of the surrounding counties would be a good thing to explore. From a Crown perspective, I think this is where we have an opportunity to look at fixed wireless providers operating there and to see if there are pockets that are being missed, and see if there's a tower that's available that could provide some sort of fixed wireless service. We've got a great program for fixed wireless service providers, WISP Go. We sought to make it as cheap and easy as possible for those small internet service providers. I mean, we're talking small shops to navigate how to get on a tower and expand their network. And honestly, with government funding available that's going to subsidize deployment, this is an opportunity for small providers like that to actually expand their network with little to no cost. And I just think that's obviously everybody wants fiber to the home. But right now, fixed wireless would be a great way to solve a right now problem. And when you're talking about places that have very small population density, fiber to the home, it might take a long, long time. And if we're doing shameless plugs.
Chances are the person that's going to solve that problem in a community that size lives in that community.
Yeah.
And this is their chance to do it and be, on the level with some of the other guys that, mail it in from out of town.
Brian, did you have a question?
Yeah, so a lot of stuff we talk about resumes a lot with me. One of the things that, the past planning thing I think is one of the key issues, and I'm curious what the questions that people need to ask to ensure that the service providers and stuff that are using Kentucky Wire as an example, and using their smooth for piece of fiber. But what's to say that what they put in now isn't going to be able to scale in the next 5 years? A lot of times, especially in fiber, talking background, what they put in now can be replaced for 5 to 10 years. And what they use even other applications on fiber, they're set with what they got now. What questions are compounding in place to ensure that the capacity planning issue is solved, even if coverage are, is an issue now, capacity is going to be an issue. How can they ensure correct questions are being asked?
You might want to repeat that question just for the viewers. I'm not sure they can hear it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the question was, how do we plan for capacity now for the future? The Kentucky Wired example with 288 count fiber across the state. I'm not sure if you're speaking about the fibers themselves. Like the fiber is typically leased in pairs. You think 288 is a lot. I thought it was a lot, but. There's conduit 2 inches wide. You can put 1,600, 1,700 fibers in the same conduit, and it's not that big. I kind of wish Kentucky Wired had done more, put more fiber in the ground and in the air, because the cost of the fiber itself is not the big cost of the project. It's the engineering and the design, running the trucks, getting access to the property. I mean, that is the heavy lift. So I do think in comparison to some fiber networks that I've seen since, 288 is modest, but it's going to, remember the state was installing to provide service to itself, and certainly they did that. They've taken care of that. With regards to ISPs, I think, remember, there's other providers of dark fiber across the state, and pretty much the same footprints. There's a lot more fiber out there that's being unused today. Now, companies being willing to release some of their dark fiber is a whole other policy conversation. We're not going to get into that. But, you can always put more fiber in. You can microtrench middle mile, actually. Getting back to faster and cheaper. I think another element of the capacity question, and I'm going to stop with this, is that's why refreshing your network's equipment is so important. That's one of the first challenges I think Kentucky Wired and the people at my old agency will face, is every 5 to 7 years, 7 is stretching it, you have to replace all the equipment, or you do start to grapple with obsolescence. And the equipment is not cheap. What the equipment does is it allows you to squeeze more capacity and speed out of that same piece of glass, and that's what allows you to stay relevant. And the innovation in equipment is one of the reasons we have to continually repurpose our spectrum. All of our TVs used to be analog TVs, and then we realized, wait a minute, that spectrum is actually very valuable for other uses like wireless connectivity. We moved everybody's TVs over to the digital spectrum. You can fit a lot more signal into the digital spectrum that TV broadcasters are using today. We're using that old spectrum for something else. It's the same with the 3G networks that some of the carriers are talking about retiring today. They want to repurpose that spectrum and use it for something else. Spectrum is a finite resource. The private sector is paying the federal government billions and billions of dollars for spectrum. But as we innovate on the equipment side, you can get more data into a piece of spectrum and using equipment innovation. So you have to continually make that reinvestment, or your network ends up 20 years from now, what we don't want is to see this huge public resource be considered obsolete. So it's more fiber and spend the money on the refreshes as they're needed.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to wrap up for today. Thank you so much for your attention. I want to thank our panelists, Phillip and Tom, and we look forward to seeing you soon at the cocktail hour. Thank you.